Hi, my name is Joe Bartolomeo. I'm an Oregon workers' compensation lawyer with offices in Astoria and Hillsboro, Oregon, and I represent injured workers. Today's video, I'm going to talk about where you are headed if you have an open and accepted workers' compensation claim. Now, I have lots of videos that talk about different aspects of workers' compensation, and one of them covers a claim from the beginning to the end. But many of the people who call me are not at the very beginning of the claim, nor are they at the very end. A lot of these folks are in the middle of a claim. They're looking at the claim going to closure, and they're not really sure what to expect. So I'm making this video, and I actually spoke with an injured worker yesterday who was facing some potential life-changing events even with an accepted claim, and so I thought I would make this video. So when we talk about an open and accepted claim, what we mean is that the workers' compensation insurance company has agreed that you suffered an on-the-job injury, and they have filed what is called a notice of acceptance. It's a letter that you receive in the mail, and that letter will tell you the medical condition that is being accepted. And that's important because the benefits that you are entitled to generally are limited to the accepted condition. But if you have gotten all the treatment that you deserve and you have been paid your time loss, your wage replacement benefit, you're probably in pretty good shape. Although I do recommend that you check out your notice of acceptance to make sure that everything going on, and what I mean by that is the medical conditions that occurred as a result of your on-the-job injury are part of that notice. There's another video that talks about that, but that's one thing I always like to remind folks of. So let's take our injured worker who has an open and accepted claim. In this particular case, we're talking about somebody who has a pretty serious upper extremity injury, which is a fancy way of saying they hurt their arm. And they work with their hands and their arm quite frequently. It's a big part of what they do. So we're going to kind of use that as a kind of a baseline to explain where things could go. All right, so the main thing that governs the next step in a claim is what kind of recovery you make from your injury. At a certain point, your doctor is going to say that you're as good as you're going to get. And the legal term for that is medically stationary. That means that time going by or more medical care is not expected to significantly improve your ability to use the injured body part in a work setting. So you've leveled out. So if we were to graph out your improvement after your injury, you're going to, on the graph, you might have your ups and downs, but overall that's a straight line and you're as good as you're going to get. Now, if you're fortunate, your straight line will be at a 100% recovery, but in many cases, your straight line or your medically stationary status may be less than 100% of where you were before the injury. So if you do make a full recovery and you're back to work, and your doctor says you're medically stable or stationary, your claim may go to closure and you may still be entitled to what's called a permanent partial disability rating. And that is primarily for the loss of the use of the injured body part as a result of the work injury. The permanent partial disability benefit is calculated by taking the results of a closing examination and punching them through the permanent impairment rating standards, or the impairment rating standards as we usually refer to them as. And out the other end will come a dollar figure, which is the compensation for your lost earning capacity. That's appealable, and that will come out when you get your notice of closure. If you are not able to return to your job, then there are a couple of possibilities. First, if your claim is closed, in that situation, and your treating doctor agrees that you cannot do the exact same job that you were doing when you were injured, even if you go back to work with the same job title, but you're doing it differently because of your injury, you're entitled to a second kind of permanent partial disability that is called work disability. And when you are rated for a work disability, the insurance company will look at your social and vocational factors. So those things would include age, your skill level, what you were physically doing before you were injured, what you're physically able to do now, what you were making, and they will also factor in the permanent partial disability rating for the what we call the whole person rating, which is based on the result of a closing exam. So the difference between somebody who's going back to their job at injury and somebody who's doing a different job is that you may be entitled to an additional permanent partial disability called work disability. Now, best case scenario is you recover fully from your injury and there is no measurable impairment after a closing exam. Then you're just going to go back to work, and you're going to find out about permanent partial disability when you get your notice of closure. The notice of closure will explain the percentage of disability, and there will be a worksheet that will explain how that number was arrived at, although it's really difficult to interpret that many times. And the thing to keep in mind is when you do receive a notice of closure, you can appeal that notice of closure, not just for the permanent partial disability rating, but other issues as well. So we've covered the rating of permanent partial disability. That's coming if we have an injured worker with a serious arm injury and maybe it affects their ability to do work. But let's take it a step further. Let's say you're injured on the job, you have a pretty serious injury, you go through treatment, possibly a surgery, and although you've made your best efforts along with your doctors to get you back to work, you're just not going to be able to go back to the job you were working when you were injured. A couple of issues come up there. Number one, you still may be entitled to some kind of what we call reinstatement or re-employment at your job. And this is because of a statute in Oregon that's not in the workers' comp statute, but it's actually a related statute that gives you a civil right under state law to your job if you come back from an on-the-job injury. Basically, that statute provides that if you are able to do your job after an on-the-job injury, you get your job back. Now, there are time limits and there are other limits on who is protected by this statute. But if you meet those requirements, you get your job back if you come back within a certain time after your on-the-job injury. If you are not able to do the job you were performing when you were injured, then again, if you qualify under the statute, the employer has to provide you with any suitable and available work. Suitable means it pays the same, it's generally in the same commuting distance as the job you held when you were injured, and you are working the same shifts and hours, pretty much the same, pay and location. Available means available. It means it has to be a job that's available. And the reason I say it that way is the employer doesn't have to create this job for you. If there is an available position, then you're entitled to that position. Another word about suitable. Suitable also means that you can physically do the job and you have the skill set to do the job. So that's a suitable and available job. An example that I can give you is I represented a nurse who suffered a severe injury to her neck while lifting and moving a patient. She went to surgery for a herniated disc, and the doctor said after surgery, no more patient lifting. So instead of doing patient care one-on-one that required that kind of heavy lifting, she was offered a position as a patient advocate. So she was not really doing the hands-on care that would expose her to heavy lifting and the risk of a re-injury. She was given an opportunity to transfer into another job. So that's a good example of a job offer or a modified job that is provided under this, we call it a civil rights statute in Oregon. Now, if it turns out that you're not able to go back to the job you were doing when you were injured and your employer does not have anything suitable and available, then we're looking at another benefit called vocational rehabilitation. And vocational rehabilitation is what I would call the third benefit in a workers' comp claim. And just to put it in context from beginning to end, after you're injured, you're entitled to medical care if your claim is accepted. If you are disabled from your job, you're entitled to a wage replacement benefit. We call that time loss much of the time. And that's the second benefit. Now, after the doctors know what you can and cannot do in terms of work, and you're not able to go back to your job and there's nothing else available, then you may be eligible for what's called a vocational rehabilitation benefit. So we'll call that the third benefit. That benefit is available if you meet the criteria, and there are two main criteria. There has to be nothing available with your employer, and your limitations prevent you from getting another job that's available in your local labor market that would earn close to, if not the same amount that you were making when you were injured. If you meet those two requirements, then you may be entitled to the vocational benefit that includes what we call an approved training program. That happens when you qualify, but what happens then is the insurance company hires a vocational counselor to work with you to develop what's called an approved training program. And while you're engaged in that program and participating in that program, you are going to receive time loss benefits just like you did if you were disabled from work before the claim closed. And you will be trained with the goal of getting you back to work earning the same amount that you were making when your injury occurred, when you were hurt and were not able to work. That benefit is not often granted. It's somewhat difficult depending upon the wage scale you worked at, the type of skill that you had in your job. That benefit is not easily qualified for, but when you do qualify for that benefit, it can be a great benefit because it gets you back to an earning capacity that is very close to, if not the same, as you were experiencing before your injury. It's like an investment in the future. And even after you finish your training program, the vocational counselor will help you with job placement. It's a fancy way of saying to help you find a job. So that's vocational services. So you're in the middle of your claim, potentially disabling injury in terms of the work you were doing when you were injured, and you're looking out at the future here, and you can see that claim closure out in the future. Those are the kind of things that we're looking at. We're looking at the permanent partial disability, we're looking at potential reemployment or reinstatement, and we're looking at vocational benefits, all along with the claim being closed. So a lot of times what happens is I get the call, and the client's right in the middle of the claim, everything's sailing along like it should, and the question comes up, should I get involved or not? Oregon's workers' comp system allows attorneys to get involved and get paid when there's a dispute and the attorney is instrumental. That's the word in the statute or the rule, I can't remember which. But the legal term is instrumental in getting you something that you did not have. So a lot of the time when I get this call, we'll take the temperature of the claim, see where things are, and then make an agreement as to whether I should get involved now or later. And usually later means when the claim goes to closure, or it could mean some kind of issue comes up and it just doesn't feel right, and there's a dispute on the horizon or an issue, or maybe the adjuster is leaning hard on the injured worker to try and settle the case, which again is a whole different topic. And if you have questions about claim closure, settlement, things like that, check out my free workers' compensation guide. I will put a link to that below the YouTube version of this video. Also, I have other videos on my YouTube channel and my website that cover these other issues in much greater detail, like claim settlement. So that's that's kind of the answer to my question or the question that I got. I'm in the middle of this claim. I'm hurt pretty badly. I might not be able to do my job. What next? That's kind of where, those are the things out on the horizon when you're in that situation. Now, if you have questions, contact us. I'll leave a link on the YouTube version of the video. If you're looking at this on my website, there's a contact button up top, and you can check that out. If we're not able to help you, we will put you in the hands of somebody who can, or at the very least will put you in the right direction, so at least you know where you stand with your claim. I hope this video was helpful. Again, contact me with questions. Thank you so much for watching.